Welcome to Read Between the Lines, a book podcast. I am your host, Molly Southgate. Today I'm interviewing
Leslie Budewitz.
How are you doing today, Leslie?
You know, it's a beautiful day in the neighborhood and I'm having fun drinking coffee and visiting with you.
Well, that sounds absolutely lovely. I'm having a great time on here with you as well. So, can you tell me about your books?
You bet. I write two lighthearted mystery series. One is called The Food Lovers Village Mysteries, set in a lakeside community on the road to Glacier National Park in northwestern Montana. No surprise, I live in a small lakeside community on the road to Glacier National Park. There are 5 books in that series so far. The first one, Death al Dente, won the Agatha Award for Best First Novel a few years ago, and that was quite a delight. I also write the Spice Shop Mysteries. They are set in Seattle. My main character runs a spice shop in Pike Place Market. I went to Seattle as a college freshman many years ago and fell in love with the market back when it was newly saved by the voters from what was then called urban removal and brought back to life. And it is a vibrant, magical place and a great setting for what's called a cozy mystery. And since your listeners may not know that term, I'll just take a moment, Molly, to explain what a cozy is. It's the light side. It's the comfort food of the mystery world, the descendants of Agatha Christie and Jessica Fletcher. Think Agatha Christie with recipes. There is typically an amateur sleuth. She runs a shop or a library or some kind of business. She gets involved in investigating murder because it comes a little too close to home. They are a lot of fun to write, a lot of fun to read. There's humor, there's pets, there's food, and there's an exploration of human nature, which is, of course, the heart of any good mystery.
Are cozy mysteries your favorite to read as well as write?
You know, I read widely, and cozies are great fun. I am particularly fond of the Maine Clam Bake series by Barbara Ross, the Coffee House Mysteries by Cleo Coyle, and the late Sheila Connolly's County Cork series set in Ireland. But I read widely, both in crime fiction and in mainstream literature.
That is wonderful. Yeah, I love books as well, as you could tell from this podcast.
I can. That's so fun.
Could you give any specifics that are outside of the realm of cozy mystery as well?
Sure. If I look around my office at my bookshelves, I can't get a whole lot of fiction titles because in my office, most of the books are nonfiction. There's several shelves of writing books. There's a stack of books on Seattle and on spice. 2 shelves of Montana nonfiction, a shelf of, this is fun, a shelf of books set in Paris, which is one of my favorite places, and then some cozies as well. I'm a big fan of the late Ivan Doig, whose work you may not know. He died a few years ago. He wrote probably 20 novels and a memoir. He started with a memoir called This House of Sky about his life growing up in Montana as a young ranch boy in the 1930s and 40s. And he wrote the voice of the young boy beautifully. Another author whose work I really like because he captures that voice so well is Jamie Ford. The Hotel at the Corner of Bittersweet, The Songs of Willow Frost. I'm pulling these out of my head, so I'm pausing a little bit. And the latest one is Love and Other Consolations. They're set primarily in Seattle, a city that I haven't lived in for many years, but that I love. And they're historical novels. In other mainstream fiction, I'm a huge fan of Elizabeth Strout and her Olive Kitteridge short story collection and the sequel called Olive Again. In crime fiction, Laura Lippman, Deborah Crombie, too many to name.
Oh, yeah. There's always so many that you just want to cite because books are so incredible. And there's so many different, so many different genres, so many different subgenres. And yeah. So can you talk a little bit about like using books and writing as comfort, like in the way of like a cozy mystery?
Sure. Some people don't quite grasp that concept. How can a mystery, which usually involves a murder, be comforting? Because, of course, there is nothing comfortable about murder, particularly in a small town where we know most of the people who live around us, or we know of them. We have some tie, some connection to them. But in a cozy mystery, the heart of the story really is the community. And I think that's where the comfort aspect comes in. What we've got in a cozy mystery is a main character, usually a woman, though not always. And I've been happy to see an increasing number of cozies in recent years with a male protagonist, because certainly a man can write or star in this kind of mystery too. Mm-hmm. We've got a main character who is deeply connected to the community. Sometimes she's a local woman, as in both of my series. Although in the Food Lovers Village series, the main character left as an 18-year-old for college and comes back as a 32-year-old. She's returning to the town where she grew up, and she's changed a little bit, and so has town. But some things haven't changed. In my Seattle series, my main character is born and raised in Seattle. So these are people with a deep connection. Although, as I said, sometimes there is a protagonist who is new to a community, and she has to get to know it quickly. It's that community aspect that allows her to investigate a crime, to see connections between things that perhaps the law enforcement officers aren't going to see, not because they're not doing a good job, but because they don't have the same perspective. They don't see things quite the same way that she does. She is, in effect, able to ask questions, see connections, go places, hear things that the official law enforcement investigation can't see. So while the official investigation is important, so is the amateur's investigation. And if we were doing video, you would see my hands moving up and down and weaving because they do that.
Oh, me too.
So we see in these books the two investigations weaving together. And what that official investigation does is restore the external order to the community that's been damaged by this murder and brings a person to justice through the justice system. But our amateur sleuth, in effect, restores the social fabric of the community.
Well, now I definitely want to go and read a whole bunch of cozy mysteries. It's a genre that I haven't really explored, and I know a lot of people who have not explored it as well, but it's something that I find so interesting because I love using books as like a comfort food almost.
They are, and yet they can still address important issues. One of the most loved series in this subgenre is the Goldie Bear Catering Mysteries by Diane Mott Davidson, and they are set in Evergreen, Colorado. She's not writing anymore, she's retired, but they are still much loved. And one of the things that she did that readers enjoyed, that has also inspired many of us writers coming after her, is that she addresses social justice issues and yet does it in this cozy format. My Seattle series in particular does that. The first book in the series, The Salt and Pepper, deals a lot with homelessness because our murder victim appears to have been a homeless man, a street denizen. There are other issues, drug addiction, domestic abuse, war protest. I'm looking at my shelves trying to remember what all has come up in these stories. Community development and how to save old buildings, when to let them go, that sort of thing. So these can be a little bit heavier issues, but they can still be dealt with in a a lighter context. And I hope I've done that.
So going back to when you were talking about all the books on your shelves, you mentioned a lot about like history, about like Seattle and spices and all the stuff that pops up in your books. Do you use those as research?
Yes, absolutely. I have a collection of 4 or 5 books at least about the history of Seattle. Oh, there's more than that, aren't there? I'm looking at the shelves here. One of my very favorites is a book called The Market Sketchbook by Victor Steinbruck. He was an architect in Seattle who was very involved in the effort in the 1960s to save the market. The market, I should say, was founded in 1907, and the buildings there all date back to anywhere from 1910 to 1930. And so there was a lot of history involved there. And his sketchbook is literally drawings that he made walking around the market, drawing people, drawing produce stalls. And these sketches were used to remind people in the city, the voters, of the importance of the market. There are a couple of other books on that. One of my other favorites that I use quite a bit, mostly just for fun, is a book of market ghost stories. I don't work ghosts into every book. There's just one, and I won't say which one it is so that I avoid spoilers, that actually has maybe ghost in it, but ghosts do play a part in the history and the legends of Seattle and the market, and that's a lot of fun too. You asked about the spice books. One of the shops that I particularly loved when I was a teenager and first discovered the market was called Market Spice, and I would go in whenever I went to the market, which was at least weekly, and have a cup of their spiced tea and just sniff and smell. And so it's really been great to use those senses, the smell and the taste, to try to add another layer of, flavor to the books.
Well, that is so cool. I always find it so interesting hearing about the research that people do to write their novels. So you mentioned doing all of this history and like learning all about where it takes place, but how did you choose where it takes place? Was it simply that you wanted to go where you lived, or what was it?
That's a good question. So the Food Lovers Village series came first, and when I decided to write it and pitched it to Berkeley, a division of Penguin, one of the publishers, I chose to write that series here in northwestern Montana because there weren't any other lighthearted series set here, and because it's such an unexpected place. Most of the cozies at that time were set in small towns in places we think of as cute: coastal North Carolina, the north coast of California, an island off of Seattle, or Nantucket, some place that we know of as cute and interesting. We don't necessarily expect that in a mountain valley in northwestern Montana. And so I wanted to show how this community fit into that world and how unexpected and fun it is. Then a couple of years later, I decided to add a second series, and I decided to set it in Seattle, even though an urban cozy is not a common thing. At that point, there were only a couple. I mentioned Cleo Coyle's Coffee House Mysteries, and I mentioned my friend Sheila Connolly. I mentioned her Irish series, which is very much a small town series, but she also wrote a series set in the museum community in Philadelphia. And by looking at those, I realized you could set a cozy in a city if you found a community within the community, as both of those authors had done. And I immediately thought of Seattle and the Pike Place Market. In fact, as I'm telling you this story, Molly, I'm picturing walking down East Lake Avenue with my husband near the Houseboat District and talking to him about a second series and realizing that was exactly the place to set it. And the market was a community within a community. And we settled quickly on a spice shop. I don't think there was ever any debate that was a great place and an anchor for an urban cozy series, partly because I loved it so much, but also because I think people are just inherently drawn to spices. They're so interesting and intriguing, and they pull together food and drink and history, and they're just so much fun.
So you were just talking about spices. What gave you the idea to translate your love of food and spices and cooking onto the page?
Well, there's actually quite a wide variety of foodie cozies, sometimes called culinary cozies. In most of them, well, not all of them, but the main character usually is someone who loves food, and very often she has some sort of food-related business. I mentioned Diane Mott Davidson and her main character, who was a caterer. In the Coffee House series, the main character runs a coffee house, no surprise there. And so that's just something that readers really love. It's a lot of fun. I talked about the community aspect, and gosh, what brings people together more than love of food? A retail shop is a really good choice for this kind of book because people are in and out, and because the main character has lots of reasons to get away from her business and investigate. And that's actually kind of a challenge. You have to make sure that she spends enough time in her shop actually running it and isn't just out and about investigating.
Yes, kind of on that point, when you were writing something, because it takes place now, correct? Like,
yes.
Not 2020, obviously, but like around this time. So how were you making sure that everything still felt modern and you didn't accidentally forget something like cell phones? Because I know that when I've tried to write that kind of thing, it can be so easy to get lost in it and forget to make it modern.
Cell phones are an interesting thing that you mentioned because in some ways they have made writing mysteries harder because so much of what the sleuth does for her investigation, she could just pick up the phone and call someone. And so we as writers have had to get more creative in figuring out how to investigate these fictional crimes in a realistic way. So in my small town, it's easy to keep things somewhat current because I can just walk there and see what's going on. Although, in fact, I have actually changed things up quite a bit. I've kept the main structure of the community, but I've moved businesses and I've added things that I wish were there and things that just could be, but maybe aren't, because it isn't my real small town. I've changed the name and moved things around. With the Seattle series, that's a little trickier because a city is constantly changing, and a building that might be something I want to use in the story might be completely repurposed. It might be torn down and moved. So my stories aren't necessarily always perfectly accurate. And so I have to ask readers just to forgive me that way. Also, one of the things that happens with fiction is if it's set in a place that we know, we still think of it the way we know it. So if I were to think of a book set in a town that I had visited 20 years ago, I've got that 20-year-old vision in my head, not the current town. And I may look at what the author has done on the page and say, well, that's not right, because I'm pulling up on my old memories and not what exists currently. So as readers, sometimes we interact with the book in a way that might surprise the author a little bit. As authors, we have to be prepared for that and try to create the feel of the city, even if a particular business might no longer be where we've put it.
Definitely. So on a somewhat different note, has your career as a lawyer influenced your writing in any way?
I've been practicing law for about 35 years. I do still practice part-time doing civil litigation and employment law and mediation. And it has influenced my writing in several ways. Actually, the very first book that was published was a nonfiction book called Books, Crooks, and Counselors: How to Write Accurately About about criminal law and courtroom procedure. And that was a guide for writers on using the law in their fiction, because so many of the writers I knew asked me questions like, can this character inherit from another character? How does my fictional police officer get a search warrant? Who is Miranda, and why are we always warning her? And so I wrote up answers to 160 questions about the law, and that actually was quite well received. It won the 2011 Agatha Award for Best Nonfiction. But in the fiction itself, my career has helped me because I have some understanding of criminal law, and I have a fairly good understanding of employment law as well. And both my characters run retail businesses. I used to work retail as a teenager and as a college kid too. And all those things come into play. I don't write about lawyers, meaning they're not my main characters, but occasionally my main character will need to consult with a lawyer, and she knows them. So it helps me make sure I'm getting the details right in a way that I hope satisfies the readers.
So can you talk about the importance of tools like Pinterest for visualizing your book setting and putting you in the headspace to write?
Sure. I use Pinterest primarily as a collage or a photograph album for myself. I don't go researching with Pinterest, but when I find a picture, either through my own photography or from other research, I will put it on a private Pinterest page just to gather these images for myself. And then I often share it with the cover artist for the book so that they can see what I have in mind. And then when the book is published, there's a public page. So for example, I've got a public board for the Food Lovers Village and for the Spice Shop series that includes, for example, Pepper's boyfriend Nate's fishing boat. It includes pictures of boats and pictures of Fisherman's Terminal. In not the new book, The Solace of Bay Leaves, but the one before that, Chai Another Day, one of my characters always wears red jade necklaces, and I found a treasure trove of them, and some of those are on that page. There's a picture of the weapon, which is kind of an interesting antique piece. I won't say anything more about that so that I don't spoil it for readers. I'm really driven by primary sources. I like to visit the scene. I like to know where an event is going to occur. For example, in the Solace of Bay Leaves, there's a particular neighborhood in Seattle called Montlake that I remembered. I lived near there when I was right out of law school. And my best friend, who still lives in Seattle, and I drove through it. We stopped, we had a cup of coffee, we wandered the neighborhood, I took pictures, and all those things really helped me a lot. Sometimes I'm illustrating something I've already envisioned. Sometimes I'm getting ideas from actually walking the streets and looking at the building. I also sketch, and I've got a sketchbook from my visits to Seattle, and that's been really helpful too.
That is so interesting. So yeah, any writers out there, now you can put all those tools into practice, because it sounds like they really help. Right?
I hope so. They help for me, and a lot of readers and professional reviewers have said that they feel like they are taking a trip to Seattle when they read the books. And so that tells me that I'm getting those visual details that really set the stage.
That is wonderful. So you were listing some of the titles of your books. How do you come up with these awesome book titles?
Well, thank you. They are pretty wonderful, aren't they?
Yeah.
They've come about in different ways. With the Food Lovers Village series, I generally have not ended up with the title I started with. those titles all have to refer to murder or death or crime in some way. They also need to clue you in on the festival or holiday that's the focus of the book, and be fun at the same time. And if they can refer to food, then that's great too. My favorite in that series is probably Crime Rib. That is set at a summer arts festival and steak grill-off. And I don't remember what my working title was, but the publisher, Berkeley, came up with Crime Rib, and it's perfectly. It's either stupidly perfect or perfectly stupid.
It is
I love
perfect.
It.
That is
Another
amazing.
one in that series is As the Christmas Cookie Crumbles. That's the 5th book in this series. I could not come up with a title. And when I turned the book in, I had to have a title. I couldn't just call it book number 5. So I came up with that one and told the publisher to change it. Well, they loved it. In the Spice Shop series, we have to be a little more deliberate about the titles right from the beginning, because the spice in the title is part of the story. And sometimes it's a clue. And so I have had to be pretty careful about those right from the start. I will tell you how the title The Solace of Bay Leaves came about. My main character, Pepper Reese, found herself at loose ends at 40. And when her life fell apart, basically, she left her marriage, she lost her job that she loved, and she ended up buying the spice shop. She often says she never expected that when her life fell apart, she would find solace in bay leaves. And so when this book started to gel, I knew it was going to be set in October, around the 2nd anniversary of her purchase of the shop. And with fall, October, November, we start to think of soup. And soup, bay leaves. I came back to that line that she often uses. And so it's not got the humor or the wordplay of some of the others, but I think it's really perfect for the story.
I really love that one. And I love that line, too, that you just said, that she would never thought she would find solace in bay leaves. I think that's really beautiful.
Thank you.
All right, so I just have one last question for you today,
yes.
And that is, what do you have coming up?
Well, The Solace of Bay Leaves is out in ebook and audio now. It will be out in paperback on October 20th. And I'm very excited for it because I really love the book. But I'm also excited for the next one, which is called Bitterroot Lake. And that will be out in April. It is my suspense debut. Ooh. And it will actually be written under a different name, the name Alicia Beckman. And I had forgotten to memorize my little short version to tell people what it's about. So I am clicking through my list here to see if I can come up with that.
Well, as anyone who's listened to this show before knows, I absolutely love suspense, so I cannot wait to read that.
So, in Bitterroot Lake, a young widow returns to her family's Lakeside Montana lodge in search of solace. Murder forces her to reconnect with estranged friends and confront everything she thought she knew about the tragic accident 25 years ago that tore them apart.
That sounds amazing. Everyone listening to this, go read all of Leslie's books. Go write a lot. Take everything that you learned today and just go do all the things that you can with that. Thank you so much.
What a wonderful and encouraging thing to say to your listeners.
Oh, thank you. Well, thank you so much for coming on. You were absolutely amazing, and I really enjoyed talking to you.
Thank you, Molly. You're a delight.
Thanks. For Read Between the Lines, my name is Molly Southgate.
And I'm Leslie Budewitz.
Let's end this the way all great stories end. Happily ever after. The end. Thank you for listening to Read Between the Lines, a book podcast. This episode is hosted by Molly Southgate. It is edited by Rob Southgate and produced by Southgate Media Group. You can get in touch with the show at readbetweenthelines@gmail.com, or you can send us a voicemail at 708-887-3673. 708-887-9473. That was 708-887-9473. You can also find us on Instagram at Read Between the Lines Podcast. Thank you so much for listening.